This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. As usual, I will ask that if you find the podcast useful, that you rate and review it on the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you get your podcasts. More than just a rate or review, please let your friends know about the podcast, and especially if you know someone who is in the process of deconversion. Because not everyone knows how to listen to podcasts, take the extra step of setting up an app for them to use and show them the podcast. On to today's show. My guest today is Jimmy. Jimmy's story is a Deconversion Anonymous story. Jimmy starts with Christianity as a part of his life, but maybe not life-defining. And as he progresses through life, it becomes more and more serious and more important to him. He eventually becomes a Calvinist until his doubts begin to overwhelm his faith. I want you to hear how careful a person that Jimmy is as he tells his story. He does nothing lightly. He takes very seriously each step along the path of his life, including deconversion. Note also the care with which he tells the people that he loves in his life. I had received an email from Jimmy early on saying that he had just come out to his kids and that he was having to do so relatively publicly to his church, in that he was no longer a part of the worship band or playing guitar. Maybe you recognize what it's like to go through that. If you are a believer, I want you to try to empathize with where Jimmy is coming from, what it's like to not only lose a sense of connection to God, but also the community around you, and the fear of losing or hurting or damaging the relationships with those that you love. Here is my conversation with Jimmy. Jimmy, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's going well. So, Jimmy, you had very kindly emailed me a while back with a bit of a cryptic sign-off. You said that you had come out to your kids as a non-believer and that you were having to do so publicly to your church.
Yeah.
I was immediately intrigued, and now a few months later, fortunately, we get to have this conversation. Mainly, I just want to start with, what is your story? What was your faith experience like? Did you grow up a believer? What was it like?
Boy, so I've been listening to this podcast for a while, and I was just telling my son last night that when you look back over a long period of, interconnected details, it's very easy to tell that story that I think you've talked about, put things together in a way that makes sense at the moment. And so this is the current moments version of the story, I guess.
Sure. Yes.
But yeah, my family is a Christian family, evangelical Christian family. I come from a line of missionaries and Bible translators and things like that. Fairly academic family. When you have linguists in your background, who have doctorates and things like that, you end up having a much more academic perspective. I also grew up overseas in the first part of my childhood. We were missionaries for a little while, and then later just regular old business people. The standard of living difference was notable. So church and religion were important. Education was important as well. Interestingly, when I was a kid, I don't remember the issue of creationism really coming up. This is a kid in the 80s. I think I'm maybe a couple years younger than you are.
Mm-hmm.
And we had dinosaur books, and they were just the regular old dinosaur books. No agenda, just dinosaurs.
Yes.
So I some memories stand out. I remember I was convicted of my sin at a summer camp in the mountains of the country where we were.
Yeah.
I felt like I was saved. I didn't really understand. I was sort of very moved by a speech that one of the counselors was giving, and just sort of took it for granted. We came back to the States. My parents divorced soon after that.
So how old were you when you had that conversion experience?
I was 7 or 8,
7 or 8.
something
Okay.
like that.
And then you don't have to be specific, but
Yeah.
what kind of faith tradition
Hmm.
would you say?
Yeah, interesting question. At that point, really nothing. I mean, it just sort of broadly evangelical. When you're overseas, you sort of take what you can get. So we attended a church that was a mishmash of backgrounds and a mishmash of um, people groups, you might say.
Okay.
I have a strong memory of my mother pointing out, well, just introducing me to a friend of hers and saying, "This, my friend, is here, and she used to be in Sudan in the middle of the 80s, and so she had fled as a refugee."
Okay.
I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
Just okay, as interesting as anything else at that age, I
Sure.
guess. Yeah, so that's our background. We just sort of broadly evangelical. A lot of Presbyterian and Methodists in that country.
Okay.
Might as well say Korea. I mean, I don't know who's going to listen to this. South Korea.
Okay.
And yeah, so we came back to the States late 80s, just before the Olympics. We watched the Olympics on a black and white TV
Yeah.
that we borrowed from a neighbor. Parents divorced after that. And then the 90s happened. Just sort of lived my teenage years through end of high school and started college. We were attending a Southern Baptist church at that point.
Okay.
I don't know, how it fit in the grand scheme of things. I was just there. We went to vacation Bible school and all the kind of standard activities.
Yeah.
Went to a boarding school for high school. There's a kind of magnet school, and that
Oh,
was an
wow.
interesting experience. Yeah. Went from a small town public high school to a high school run by the university system. And
Okay.
so the teachers are more accurately called professors. It was just it was a really good opportunity for a lot of things. It was a good opportunity to hang out with other students who wanted to be there.
Right.
That one dynamic changes a lot about how you do school.
So this is something that you chose. You wanted to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, not military school or anything like that.
They weren't shipping you off. Yeah.
No. I had a good relationship with my family. And up to that point, we were kind of, I would say, serious but not hardcore, if that makes sense. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure how to delineate it. From that perspective, I was a Christian, and I believed, and I cared about what the youth group people were saying, and I cared about how I lived, and I didn't really run in the wrong crowds, as it were, or anything like that. Just doing my best, I guess.
Right.
Moved to this school, and we had classes on evolution. That was one of the classes.
Yeah.
Genetics. People walking around with fruit flies and test tubes all day long. Just, there's a genetics student. And it was a very, very interesting experience, because not only did everybody care, but everybody also thought.
Right.
They came from families that thought, and I was exposed to a lot of different people there. Just lots of different worldviews. Still, we're in the South, strongly in the Bible Belt,
Okay.
and so we had very vibrant Christian campus ministry on campus, and then churches would send vans to the school and ship people off for Sunday services and bring them back later after feeding them and stuff like that. Kind of, good service if you want to go to church. And so the people I hung out with were either the people I was living with in the hall, or people who were part of the campus ministries.
So I kind of see the trajectory you're going on here. So you have a family background of academics, particularly in linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a pretty high performing high school, it sounds like,
Mm-hmm.
where science is definitely supported and encouraged.
Yeah.
So you're learning critical thinking skills even in high school at this point.
Sure. Yeah, but I came out of it not weaker than went into it. I sort of held on to my evangelical faith with no injury at all, if you want to put it that way, but with a lot more exposure to other people, other ways of thinking. Went to college after that, state school, and met my future wife. It's an interesting story. I kind of was, I philosophically and spiritually sort of at loose ends after high school, and I don't remember exactly why.
Okay.
I had grown up leaving things just by virtue of moving. If you live in one country and move to another country, it's very hard to maintain relationships in the middle of the 80s unless you're diligent about writing letters and
right,
whatever else. And so what I realized after I started college, I started to realize that I did not know how to maintain friendships. And that if someone from one previous bubble of my life entered my current bubble, it threw me for a loop. It was very strange.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm in college, and I meet this young lady, and we just hit it off right away. She was interested in the fact that I was a Christian, or she assumed I was probably a Christian because I was friends with a friend of hers who was a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hit it off, worked on physics class together. We both shared a major,
Okay.
Computer science. And then we started doing homework together, hanging out, a lot of just sort of normal friendship stuff. Very kind of a natural relationship, no weird pressures or anything like that. And one day we're studying, and she asks me, "So, do you believe in Calvinism?"
Okay.
And I said something clever like, "What? No, why should I?"
Yes.
And so this next phase is going to sound like a period of strong indoctrination, a period of brainwashing or whatever like that. I can easily see it coming across like that, but that's not how I see it now, and that's not how I saw it then.
Yeah. Let me say, I completely understand what you're saying. I feel when I tell my story, there is a way of looking at it that it does feel super manipulated and so on and so forth. And yet I felt like I had agency and decision making through the whole thing. I chose this. I chose to learn more about Christianity, more about. So I get it. So please feel free. Just tell the story as you see it.
Yeah, sure. So I met her family, got invited as a group over to their house. I got to know her family, and we hung out a lot, and eventually they suggested that I listen to some tapes, cassette tapes. And it was of a guy named R.C. Sproul, who's a very famous Reformed preacher and teacher. And I was commuting at the time, probably an hour each way every day. And I listened through a church history course. I listened through just a number of sermons, and it just made sense to me, this Calvinism thing.
Yeah.
And so I embraced it, sort of not because I was looking for it. I had never thought it was a horrible thing. I just didn't know much about it. It came into my life and made sense, and so I latched onto it. I think I was more looking for clarity and belonging and purpose and all that, and it offered that. It was very clear. It's very coherent, and at the time, it was a very I don't know, serious. I wanted to take things seriously, I guess.
Yeah. I said this a few times. I really think that people who take their faith seriously go down one of a handful of paths, right? You either go the very heavily charismatic Pentecostal, that God is acting in the world in a very physical, real way. You go into deep fundamentalism, serious legalism, or you go down the road of Calvinism. And I really do think that is because if you take it really seriously, if you really want to take Christianity to the depths or the logical conclusions, those are kind of your options. And so so I hear a little bit in your voice of almost justifying why you explored Calvinism, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is a logical conclusion.
right. Yeah, it's kind of a local minimum.
Right.
You kind of have a bunch of different factors that fit way better than sort of riding the fence between something else,
Right.
Yeah. So there I was, a Calvinist, and then my friendship blossomed into romance, and we took purity very seriously without kind of. Uh, it's an interest. I've learned a lot by hearing other people's stories, and I value other people's stories greatly.
Mm-hmm.
The whole purity culture thing didn't harm me or my wife in
Okay.
any way. We fumbled a lot of things, but when you're young and you're trying to do what's right, don't know what's right, then
Yeah.
whatever, it happens.
I don't know about the time period. It seems to me that the 80s and the early 90s wasn't quite as bad. It
Right,
sounds like
right.
the millennials who were born in the 90s
Yeah,
really had it terribly
yeah,
bad,
yeah,
late 90s, early
yeah.
2000s. But I hear what you're saying, right? You take it
Right,
seriously, but it isn't trauma inducing in some way.
right, right. I think possibly because the people around me hadn't really internalized it, we took it as our own thing. I think my one strong memory I have is that just maybe a month or less before we started dating, uh, she handed me the "I Kiss Dating Goodbye" book,
Okay. Yeah.
which which may have been published that year or the year before that. I'm not sure. But it is an interesting thing to receive from someone you want to date.
Sure. Sure. It's kind of like getting a prenup.
Right. So I read it and I was like, oh, well, it makes sense, I guess. And then so we moved on, and we dated, and there's a lot of family context. She had a fairly large family, when you look at American averages.
Okay.
And I loved her family. We had and have great relationships. They were maybe they're wonderful people, and they are also not anti-intellectual in any way.
Right.
Um, they are way more hardcore than I was growing up, than my family was.
Okay.
Very, very serious in a very holistic way. And I admired that greatly
Hmm.
at the time. Still do. I mean,
Yeah.
very consistent. A desire to do what's right and a desire to love people, which is a very hard balance to maintain sometimes
Yes.
when condemnation and judgment is sort of built into the system, whether unconsciously in
Right.
many cases. But that's a very happy period of my life. Um, then we sort of glided right into marriage
Uh-huh.
right out of college. I did finish college in 7 semesters so we could get married sooner. Still a decision I'm happy about.
Yeah, exactly.
Started, kind of a boring career path in many ways. Sort of, I decided to be a programmer early on and became a programmer. I'm a programmer now. So
Okay.
I didn't have to go through any experimental phases career-wise.
Yeah.
So 2000, yeah, early 2000s, we got married, and while we were engaged, my future father-in-law told us about a house church that was going to constitute. It was going to become a church, and they were having Bible studies, and it was a Reformed Baptist church. And there are various flavors of Reformed Baptist. This particular kind is one that subscribes to the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith,
Okay.
which is very similar to the Westminster Confession, if you've heard of that. And we thought, oh, Reformed Baptist, we're Baptist, we like Calvinism, okay. And so we started attending the Bible studies and then the church after we got married. And that was our church for a year. It was a startup church, and like many startup anythings, it went under
Okay.
in less than a year after we started. But the last sermon that was preached was, you should try this other church a couple towns over. And so we did next Sunday, and that's where we've been ever since. It is also a Reformed Baptist church, a much bigger one, much more well established. And in this around this time, my first child was born. That affected me very, very heavily in ways that I didn't anticipate. Sort of brought out aspects of my character that surprised me.
Hmm.
And that started a period of internal struggle, of like not wanting to do better, seeing the ideals that were laid before me, and not knowing how to connect the dots.
Yeah.
You know, if you're planning a project, you look at the outcome, and then you work your way backwards to where you are now, and then you march toward it and make adjustments along the way. The one thing I knew how to do was read these books and pray. And when the rare times, which yeah, I was not looking for a lot of counsel at the time, but the rare times I got counsel, it was basically read these things and pray.
Right.
And that's probably a mischaracterization of it, but that's how I internalized it. Your interview with Captain Cassidy was interesting to me because she talks about Jesusing harder.
Yes. Yes. She has a number of just beautifully phrased
Right.
aphorisms that just, I love it.
Yeah. You know, that's maybe what it was. It was sort of like, well, I call it pray and wait. It's surely there's something I can do, but in Calvinism, there's a heavy emphasis on how much we can't do,
Right.
how inadequate we are, and that's a good thing. You know, that's sort of the perspective. It's
Right.
like you need to depend on Jesus, and He's designed it so that you need to depend on Jesus. So, you know, years go by, and I'm beating myself up for my failures, and
That sounds familiar.
yeah, and you know, marriage is good, family is generally good, but I've got these character issues that I really want to deal with, and then more stressors, you know, more children. I decided I started at a job, and I ended up traveling overseas a bunch, and that sort of stressed my wife out. She was a stay-at-home mother at the time, and yeah, boy, that was a stressful period.
Right.
Looking back, a good period. Now, there's a lot of positive memories, but it's kind of mixed. So in there, I taught apologetics at in Sunday school for 2 years.
Okay.
Interestingly, looking back at my notes, I saw a number of places where I kind of wrote out, this is the party line, and I can't claim this, so I'm going to say this.
Right.
And it was not a conscious thing. It was more like I need to be honest, and I can't tell these people to kind of pin their hope on something that's flawed in this way.
Mm.
So like intelligent design is the one I remember in specifically. Well, here's this what intelligent design is, and it talks about specified complexity and all,
Yeah.
and then this is their definition of information, and then it suffers from these problems. You know, we can agree with it without it being a perfect system. So here's a couple places where it's weak.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. Do you feel better?
Yeah. Yes. And Jimmy, you're telling my story here. I've said a number of times that apologetics was part of the problem, in that I was convinced of the conclusions,
Sure.
but I couldn't shake that there seemed to be fatal flaws in the arguments.
Yeah.
And you just can't escape that. And especially, it sounds like for you as well, when honesty is kind of a deep value for you. If honesty is super important to you, then it becomes very, very difficult to square the circle.
Yeah, I think that's right. And where I ended up was, so this is apologetics. Remember, it's about giving a defense for the hope that's within you. So the first thing is you need to look like something that people care about. You know, you need to have some evident hope and start there. The rest of this is kind of just for your edification. And by the way, your faith is not in these arguments.
Right.
Your faith is supposed to be in Jesus.
Right.
And that's, I don't know, that maybe that's the lamest apologetics class ever. We went into great detail, but man, looking back, it's funny.
Yeah.
But that was a 2-year period of my life. Several years later, I left corporate America and started my own freelancing business, which was its own stress. That was about not quite 10 years into our marriage. So the rest of that, you know, life sort of spreads out, time intervals spread out. you start living in one place longer than you've ever lived in any place before. This is the longest I've ever lived in one country. Oh, this is the longest I've ever lived in one town. House.
Yeah.
Well, job. It sort of continues as you get older, I guess, at least in my case.
Yes, just being an adult, that's what happens.
Right.
Yes.
And it was interesting that I don't know, looking back, that there was much going on in that period aside from me just trying to live my life, and then also having this sort of guilt and shame cycle, and trying to do better as a parent. And around about 2014, end of 2014, I overheard a conversation between some family members. And one of them, very strongly evangelical, was talking about faith to another one who was not strongly evangelical.
Okay.
He was sort of just not. He was an early nun, I guess you might say.
Sure.
And it just sort of clicked in my mind that it was a possibility that someone just didn't care. Someone I cared about. I knew it was intellectually a possibility. I knew plenty of atheists, and I knew that there was lots of kinds of people, but it's one of those clicking moments.
Yeah.
Something clicked.
This is a human being that you know that their
Mm-hmm.
character,
Mm-hmm.
you know that they are not a terrible human being, that
That's right.
they don't leap to illogical conclusions, and
Mm-hmm.
that has an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and they have positive character attributes that I admire.
Right.
I wish I could be more like that aspect of this person.
Yeah.
Sent an email to my youngest brother, who I suspected was not a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I suspected was not a Christian after years and years of him not being a Christian. Shows,
okay.
you just don't ask.
Right.
So I sent him an email. I said, "Where are you on the belief thing?" Well, I stopped thinking of myself as a Christian, a long time ago, and here's a little bit of my story. Well, how do you make sense of things? And he gave me an answer, and I just sort of parked on that. I just sat, end of conversation with him, sort of sat on it. It was just, oh yeah, I'm curious. April of that year, sitting in my bed, doing my quiet time, reading my Bible and praying in the morning. And I was praying, and I realized I don't think anything's happening. And that was scary. It was quite scary.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking of consequences. It was just more like, this is not something I am built to handle. So I sat on it.
Yeah.
And just wanted to wait. Because I think when I had short periods of doubt in the past, I would just let them go by. It's like, well, I want to buy that new trinket, but I know I don't really need the new trinket. So I'm going to set a timer for 1 month. Say, that way I can stop thinking about it for a month. Right. And then a month later, I won't want it anymore, and I win.
Yes.
So that was sort of how I treated this. I was just like, I'm not going to tell anybody, and I'm just going to sit on it.
Yeah. I don't want to insult you, but I expect that maybe you are a geek. And this reminds me so much of Westworld, especially the first season, where the hosts, which are robots, right? Whenever they see some part of the real world, they would say, doesn't look like anything to me. And that is the experience of doubt, right? The cognitive dissonance kicks in at 100%. Mm-hmm. You're able to see something that now appears obvious to you, but at the time you kind of just go, you put it on a shelf, you don't think about it.
Right. Read later.
Yeah.
And that's right. And it's, I think you were talking about something on Twitter or retweeting somebody the other day about epistemic closure.
Yes.
I think the term was, and the idea being that you've got mechanisms in your brain that help you to dismiss things. It's not simply not hearing the things, it's being able to dismiss them,
right,
or set them aside. Yeah. Obvious in hindsight, like a lot of things.
Yes. We can't beat ourselves up about it, right?
No, and I don't. Yeah. Still at this period doing quiet time in the morning. Although I will say I read through Ecclesiastes about 5 times. I was like, well, if I'm going to read anything, I'm going to read the one thing that I can relate to.
That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. But I did everything like I had been doing, because that's how I knew how to do it. When I was correcting my kids, I would bring Bible verses to bear. And when I was listening to someone's good news, I would praise the Lord and be thankful that, they had the opportunity to, trust in Jesus and all these things, and I believed it. It's this double-minded kind of thing going. I truly did believe it, like I had always believed it, but at the same time, it was sort of like I had partitioned my own thoughts. Sometimes I would veer into the other realm, and whenever things were conflicting with each other, I'd be frustrated, or I would set something aside.
Right.
So at this point, I'm reading a lot of fiction. Read East of Eden, which had a very hopeful and humanistic perspective there at the end. Looking back, that's how I see it.
I'm having the same experience of, in my college days, I read a lot of Dostoevsky,
Mm-hmm.
Brothers Karamazov, Notes from the Underground, a few others. And, as a Christian, there's enough there. He's a believer enough that it's there. But the other side of the equation is also there.
Yep.
So, looking back and going, oh, yeah, this is very, very, very humanistic. And
Yeah. Which isn't a problem if you're a Christian. It's only a problem if you're a certain kind of Christian that can't handle those sorts of things.
Right.
That where humanism is, Horace Mann and John Dewey and the people that perpetrated the public school system on us and stuff like that. Yeah. So, and reading books, there's a book called Blue Remembered Earth, which is this wonderful hard sci-fi novel where it involves sort of a future world post recovery from climate change, and just follows. There's like the number of white people in the story is so small.
Okay.
And the main family is Kenyan or Tanzanian or something like that. I think it may be Tanzanian. And then they're just doing their space stuff, and expanding. They're starting to set the stage for expansion. And then The Light of Other Days is a book about, I think, Arthur Clarke. The idea was someone discovered wormholes, and you had the ability to look at anything and any time. And so with these wormholes, basically all privacy is gone.
Okay.
And what does that do? What does that do to society? There's people that hang on to the old way and live in the darkness because they can't stand people looking at them. But it ended up being a very completely materialistic perspective on person and memory. You're able to be resurrected in the end because they could basically scan who you were with wormholes later on and then just sort of reprint you, as it were. So that's a year into it. And so I'm not going to great effort to shield myself from outside influences. I'm just sort of going with the flow.
Yeah.
I attended a wedding with family, got to hang out with some really great people who were not Christians and who were, they were Bible translators, and then some of them were just musicians and doing their thing.
Yeah.
Just people,
Right.
And near the end of 2018, I think it was somewhere in 2018, I asked my middle brother, not the youngest brother, my middle brother who attended church and was a leader in the church, if he ever had doubts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
He is a man of few words. So I eventually opened up to him, and I said, I'm having really serious doubts. Oh, okay. Have you ever read the Stoics? So I got into the Stoics at that point. And what I liked about it, what I came to learn later, was Christianity basically replaced Stoicism as a popular philosophy of life.
Right.
And because it was demanding, it replaced it. It did not coexist with it.
Right.
There was no coexistence. Whereas with Stoicism, you can just say, well, you're stupid if you believe this, but whatever, it's your life.
Yes.
Which that's, kind of how some of the Stoic writers talked.
Yeah.
But I liked that it was about pursuing wisdom.
Mm.
I liked that it was about pursuing virtue. That really hit me at a good time. And I liked that it was just ridiculously pragmatic. Like
Right.
Seneca the Younger, one of the three famous Stoic writers, says something like, well, if it turns out I stop having a particular character flaw just because I'm old, I'll take it.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like, get over it. You don't have to have this pure mentality. Because I remember reading The Death of Death and the Death of Christ by John Owen, a Puritan. You're supposed to mortify your sin. You're supposed to kill your sin. How do you kill your sin? Well, if you don't, it's still going to be there. It's just going to look different.
Yeah.
And I had internalized that. It's like, well, if I don't deal with this anger problem of mine, then it's just going to turn into grouchiness or something, and it'll never go away. And Seneca's just like, whatever. I just want it gone. I don't care.
Yeah.
So, just this very pragmatic approach to making yourself a better human.
Right.
Their core idea is that people are rational and people are social, and everything flows out from that.
Mm-hmm.
So it hit me at a time when I needed something.
Yeah.
So I started reading a lot about that. My wife is getting uncomfortable with my reading. My cell phone has a skull on it to remind me that death is coming and I better live now.
Yeah.
If you're not going to live now, when are you going to live?
Yeah.
My daughter says, Dad, why do you have a skull on your phone? And so what does my wife say? She can't say, don't ask, because of course that's like, don't think about pink elephants or whatever. So she's getting uncomfortable with what I'm reading. It doesn't look like I'm really pursuing Christianity. And it wasn't that I was running away from it, but I think I had at that point somehow I had internalized that I wasn't a believer.
Okay.
Somewhere in there, just in the mix. Realized I was going to have to come out at some point. I couldn't maintain a charade.
Yeah.
And that was maybe second scary, second realization that was frightening to me. It was just not a comfortable thing.
No.
What is this going to look like? What is this going to look like? So that's 2018, I believe. Yes. So I actually signed up I listened to the Life After podcast.
Yeah.
Which was very helpful at the time. Thanks, guys. If you ever hear this.
Yeah, Brady and Chuck over there. Yeah, those are good people. So.
Yeah. Joined the Facebook group there, listened to a podcast that was just made counseling sound like the most normal thing ever. Personal trainer for life. It's help you solve your own problems. It sounded perfect. And it addressed a discomfort that I couldn't name, which was that dual relationship between pastor and flock member. The fact that if I let all my dirty secrets out, this person is now eating barbecue with me. Where we live, barbecue is a noun. And this person is eating barbecue with me and also knows all these secrets. The leadership at my church is very good. They're very wise and careful. For very, very committed Christians, very serious inerrantists and fundamentalists in a certain sense.
Sure.
They just are very careful people.
Okay.
Very, very careful. And so they are trustworthy in that regard, but there's still a problem. I mean, it still doesn't. It makes sense to divorce the two relationships if you can.
Yeah.
So I signed up for BetterHelp.com, which is one of the online sites. I sort of signed up for it and was very careful not to expose myself, let people know that I was having counseling, particularly my wife. Why would you have counseling?
Wow. And I mean, let's just stop to think about that for a minute. Something that can be very, very helpful for a huge number of people. It seems to be off the table as an option, and not just off the table, but that it would be looked down upon, like your faith wasn't good enough in some way, when you just need to be able to be honest and express yourself without editing, without trying to form the narrative in some fashion or other.
That's right. And I may have overplayed the fear in my own mind, but it's there. It's built on something, and perception is reality in that sense. But at this point, I'm full blown pursuing leaving the church.
Yeah.
Both dealing with the hell thing internally, psychologically, and then also, what is this going to look like? How is this going to play out? How can I love these people?
Yeah.
How can I not harm them? Or how can I minimize the harm?
Yeah.
And then justification, not rationalization, just understanding. What do I think? What do I believe?
Yeah.
Am I just leaving one fundamentalism for another fundamentalism? So I was answering all these really hard questions internally by myself, but with this counselor and also with the help of my brother.
Okay.
Who was willing to listen and ask me questions, challenging questions at times, very challenging.
as you go through that deconversion process and what you've described is a long period of time where
Yep.
at some point you start to be honest with yourself and then you start actively going to look
Yep.
for more information. The point I want to make here is that it's possible to criticize or to let go of a belief system before you really know where you're going to land, right?
Yes.
You don't necessarily have a complete philosophical underpinning of
Right.
humanism and naturalism and all of those things underneath you as you are letting go of theism.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Sure.
And it's okay to go and be curious and look at Stoics and
Yes. Yes.
look at humanistic writers, look at science or what have you, lots of things that might have been off the table. Go seek counseling, as we've just mentioning. Just being human is
Yeah.
okay.
Oh yeah.
And even after years after deconversion, if you can't completely justify a naturalistic explanation of the world, that's just not your job. You don't have to do that.
No. No. I think a lot of it was sort of personal.
Mm.
I have a tendency to want to have a landing pad before I leave something.
Sure.
Not that I've left a lot of things, but yeah, I think you're completely right. And I have given myself space not to have to commit to a lot of things.
Mhm.
My kids call me a stoic, but I don't.
Right.
I don't call myself that, for instance. And I think humanist is a great word for it. I was very, promote humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that exploration part, I think, it was a freeing thing to just let myself do it. Read a book about a former Bible translator who wrote a book called Why I Believed, which is not so much why I left, although that was in there, but it was more like why I cared, why this was even a thing.
That's really interesting. Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's freely available online, so I could read it in private browsing mode, no problem.
Yeah.
Ha
Okay.
ha ha.
Yeah.
Some people look at bad philosophy in private browsing.
Yes. I'm sure that's why they invented the feature.
Oh yeah. But anyway, so it's both an invigorating and very scary time for me at this point. I'm thinking through, how is this going to play out? What does this look like? Am I going to get excommunicated? Am I going to get, dragged before the church? Are people going to send me angry emails? And I had a long list of potentially scary things that
Sure.
could happen.
Yeah.
And I knew that I was making them up, but I was sort of just like, I wanted to see it in writing and remind myself why I'm trying to be careful. And it's because of people I love. The best people I know are die-hard Christians.
Right.
They would die for their faith, like I would have 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to harm these people, and I don't want to make them think that I think they're idiots, and I don't want to just all of a sudden conjure up images of Christopher Hitchens sneering at them whenever they look at me.
Right.
That was a hard time. But late in 2018, I revealed to my wife that I was having doubts.
Okay.
And come to find out later that she had basically gone through all her grieving at that point, just immediately. She was, I think, putting what I was reading and all these other things. She came to the conclusion before I did.
Right.
I mean, I had already had suspicions, but I hadn't committed to myself.
My wife describes it similarly. She says that
Yeah.
when I finally talked to her about my doubts, that's when she felt like I was being honest and that she felt like I was faking it prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite see it that way, but I appreciate the perspective. And I think it's a valid insight, right?
Yeah.
People that we love know us in a way that we can be blind to.
Yeah. 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 So I let her know, and I kept praying for meals. We kept praying together at bedtime. I would pray with the kids at bedtime. I would pray out loud at church. I was a guitar player at church. At that point, it wasn't hypocrisy, really, although it started getting to be more like that. Came out to my youngest brother. We were all getting together as in a family group, and he's in one part of the country, and my middle brother's in another part of the country, and then we all got together for Christmas, and I got them together. I basically said, I've gathered you here today to
Yes.
I think I'm not a Christian anymore. He's like, oh.
Right.
Which that was the whole feeling alone thing, that's just hard.
Yeah.
All the people you really care about, you can't tell.
Right.
Because, well, for a long time, I wasn't even sure. So I did not want to cause trouble that was unnecessary. And then eventually, I wanted as much as possible to play it out on my own terms so that I could control the damage.
Yeah.
And so, that was a relief to me to have two people who I was close to know about it. Very much of a relief.
And it's cathartic in that
Mm-hmm.
you can feel the weight of this truth about yourself. I imagine that people in the LGBTQ community feel the same way. You know this
Yeah.
thing about yourself, and you
Mm-hmm.
know that the people who love you the most
Yeah.
don't know it. Maybe they know it intuitively, but not because you haven't stated it outright.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're able to do that with someone you trust, someone you love, someone who's not going to run away screaming, it's incredibly freeing.
Yes, it is. That's right. You're free to be who you are. Yeah, later on, I had an experience where I went on a business trip and then visited my youngest brother and hung out with him and his wife. And then a month later, we had a full family get together, and he said, you were very different when you were with us from what you are now. I thought, that's interesting.
Yes.
More relaxed, I think is what he said. So at this point, I did a study of I read The Language of God, which is by Francis Collins, the guy who did the Human Genome Project, committed Christian, loves C.S. Lewis, wrote a book on why Christianity is correct and also why evolution is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Studied through that, met with one of my pastors for the first time about my doubts.
Okay.
His counsel to me was to stop reading the works of man and to just read the Bible and focus on the Bible and prayer. And I thought, the Bible is part of the problem, and
yes.
and so is prayer. But I did it. I know I tried.
Right.
I couldn't really pray. It's very difficult. But I did. I started a study of creation and Genesis and wrote out a bunch of stuff. I also started reading a book called Why Evolution is True.
Okay.
So books helped me along the way. A lot of fiction. Jayber Crow is a book by Wendell Berry, just a wonderful book. If you like trees, nature, and humanity, it's a wonderful book. And he has a faith crisis. It's very different in nature from mine, but he sort of just comes to a peace with it at the end, and he's a person with people.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. So anyway, not to list all my books, but
you know what we'll do is I'm going to have you email me a list of books that you recommend, and we'll just put those in the show notes, and people can pick up some of the things, because I know I won't be able to catch all the ones you've mentioned.
Sure. And they might not speak to everybody. I even read a book called How Not to Be Secular, which is a book for Christians by a Christian, but it was very honest.
Okay.
And the fundamental thesis of the book is there is no going back to the Middle Ages when it's convenient that everyone around you is perfectly the same spiritually as you are. There is no going back away from modernity where many different kinds of worldviews are living like this with each other. Mm-hmm. And there's constant pressure against your own worldview. And here are your choices. You can wall yourself off from outside influence, etc. And very refreshing book, very helpful book. I've read it twice. So, and I don't think I got out of it what he was intending.
Right. I sometimes feel defensive for the people that I interview, and this is what I mean. This is what I mean. A lot of the pastoral apologetic class will hear your story and pick apart what you did right or wrong. And
yes,
one of the things they'll pick apart is that you read the Stoics, you did read humanistic authors and things, and it's like the entire point is, if faith and the claims of Christianity are true, they should easily withstand the superficial level of scrutiny that we're describing here. We're not talking about a super critical analysis. We're just talking about just posing the question, what if this weren't true? And it crumbling to the ground.
Yeah. In fact, I consciously avoided anti-Christian works. I read defense works that were defensive, works that were for something else. But I avoided consciously. I have not read a word of Bart Ehrman, for instance, not a word. And I may someday.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was a very conscious decision. And you know, I want to think about this further, but there's something about that. If you pursued these things and you fell away, and it's your fault, then I wonder. You know, I have this line of reasoning. Well, what is assurance? They talk about assurance of faith, and I had assurance of faith, and I fell away. I mean, what good is your assurance?
Yes.
I mean, I don't say that because that would be unkind, but that's kind of where my mind goes. But I totally get it.
It's interesting. You're describing a emotion, maybe is the wrong word, that I've had as well, in that just by stating where you stand, that you no longer believe in God, that you no longer believe in Christianity, makes or implies a negative statement about someone else's faith.
Yes.
One of the challenges that I've had, especially talking with my wife, is to try to explain to her that, of course, we disagree on some level, but that I love her for who she is, which includes her faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm not interested in humiliating, making fun of, poking holes in her faith. I have zero interest in that. I care about her. And so there's this weird dichotomy of, I can't help that there are implications based on just me stating where I'm at. And at the same time, trying to be as respectful as I possibly can of the people who I love, who are, like you said, all around me, who have dedicated and real life-changing faith that makes them very good human beings.
Yeah, that's right. It is a shame. There's nothing you can do about it. Nothing I can do about it aside from be kind.
Yeah.
And be listening. Now, I will say there's a weird dynamic, and this is sort of skipping ahead, but there is a weird dynamic of, since I'm surrounded by it, I'm still attending church. I mean, virtually at this point, but still attending church. And so there is this sort of defense mechanism going on all the time. It's like, oh, you say that, but blah, blah, blah. There's a Tetris effect there. There's a sort of a mind pattern that ends up happening, so that when my daughter says something like at the dinner table, like, well, how can you have morality without God? Well, actually, let's start by describing the world first, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and then that's not a good place to go. That's not, start, because that really ends up being de facto attack, even though I'm stating a positive case for
right
perspective, which is exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. Yeah, so September of last year, I had met with pastors a couple times. I was very clearly not getting better. You talk about the resurrection being the thing, and that never was really for me. Logically, I didn't go that route, but my pastor did. He said, you should read this book by N.T. Wright. This thick.
Yeah. Yes. That's quite a commitment. Yes.
He said, well, I'll actually just read these chapters. So I paid for the book, bought it. I was genuinely interested in doing study. I read the book, the parts of it, and just, it's like, okay, you're saying a bunch of stuff. You know how much work it's going to be for me to actually look into all these things that you're saying from either side. It's like, it was a big challenge. But anyway, I had met with the pastors a couple times. They had been very kind, compassionate, but one of them said, do you think it might be wise to step down from all the things you're doing?
Yeah.
Guitar, board member of a school that I helped start. I had the church opening, closing team, that sort of thing.
Right.
So I did. I stepped down September.
Okay. And this was somewhat public, or did you just resign and walk away, or?
It was only public insofar as not being there ever again.
Got it. Okay, got it.
Jimmy, is your hand hurt? People were very kind. I mean, people were thankful for my guitar playing and very kind, and they didn't, only one of them, and this is just who he is, only one of them was saying, so when are you going to start playing again?
Yeah.
Everybody else was like, I miss your playing.
I miss you. I love you so much.
That's right. he was the non-Southerner. Anyway, so at this point, the church does a 5-week series on biblical reliability, and I'm listening, and I'm like, this is very interesting to hear from the other side. Resigned from the board that December last year. My pastor suggested I meet with the church apologetics guy. And I call him the church apologetics guy, sort of as a joke. I mean, he's very much into apologetics. He was my co-teacher in the class that I taught, and I was like, oh, this can't be good. But so we met in January. It was fine. Stressful time.
My church, they recommended the same thing. They were like, wouldn't you want to talk to, these 3 people? And I was like, are you sure those 3 people want to talk to me? It goes both ways.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm listening to all the voices of deconversion and all the life after and all the graceful atheist and all the, what else? There was other
Life After God's another one I highly recommend.
Yeah. Okay. And I had never done podcasts before.
Yeah.
So this is this new life area I have to carve out time-wise, which is okay when you're driving places, but when you're not driving places, it sort of dries up. Yeah, so January, I told my wife that I was planning to resign. Stopped praying with her. I prayed at meals with the kids still, but basically just pretending at that point.
I imagine that we've got a variety of different responses when you describe that. From some people, maybe horror. From some people, sympathy. I think the 3rd episode I had with a guy named Matt the Cook is his Twitter handle. And he's a fascinating person because he described being religious but not spiritual. In other words, he practices religious disciplines like prayer as an atheist. Definitely an atheist, but he practices these things. One of the ways that I've been able to kind of square the circle with family members who, they pray before every meal. And I'm personally uncomfortable with being the person saying the words, but I'm fine with holding hands with the group and being quiet. And what I hear from them is, we love our family, right? Yes. That prayer is, we love each other. We are bonding with one another. We are sharing this meal as a ritual as much as just hanging out with each other. And that's just fine. If you're an atheist, you don't have to be scared of that.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not.
Yeah, I close my eyes.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't scare me at all. I think I understand exactly where you're at with that.
Yeah. It's awkward though. I mean, particularly when you've prayed at bedtime with your wife all your marriage, and then one night you don't.
Yeah.
What comes next? And that's actually one of the bullet points. I can't keep praying with my wife.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch for her too, and so she's brokenhearted, of course, and so we talked about how to tell the kids, and she said she didn't want me to attack Christianity, and I agreed, still do. But I said I wanted to let them ask me any questions that they wanted to. They didn't want to ask me any questions.
Deafening silence. Yes, I hear you.
One of the hardest moments of my life, and it wasn't until after that moment that I realized just how different their upbringing was compared to mine. They have been bathed in one church their entire life. They've been in a small town in the South and received very conscious education worldview-wise. But man, I drafted an email to send to the church, but I wanted to talk to the pastor first, and I told him what was going to go on, and he didn't seem surprised. My wife didn't seem surprised. I was surprised at how unsurprised everybody was. So
exactly.
Yeah, so I wrote an email, and I tried to make it very gracious, and it truly reflected where I was and where I am now, which is I don't want to fight. I also kind of don't want to deal with apologetic stuff. So, if I don't address your questions, that's why. If I do address your questions, I'll give you a chance to back off first. Not to say that I'm going to blow you away with my arguments, but It's just more like, this is a dynamic I don't want in my human relationships right now.
Yeah.
So I wrote the email, sent it, and they said, okay, we're going to tell the church next time. My kids are there.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Hardest, but telling them, I had told them first. That was a very hard time. Everybody was, my son was angry. My daughters were heartbroken. You feel sorry for them, but
Yeah.
it's one of these things where I think this has got to be a Band-Aid I'm ripping off, not a cancer I am injecting into my family, and I'm going to do my darndest to make sure that this works, that they know I love them. But at this point, I had been freed to pursue alternate methods of improving my character. And so all those problems that were causing me guilt and shame were gone, just gone.
And the cognitive dissonance. I don't think you really know how much cognitive dissonance you are holding until you drop it and it's gone. And then you go, oh, this is what not being mentally fatigued all the time feels like.
Yeah. And when Joel Burgess, is that his name?
Yes.
He was talking about, and he finally said something near the end of the episode that was very similar to something I had been thinking, and that is conversion is remarkably similar to deconversion. In fact, deconversion is just a conversion.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of relief that you feel. You capitulate to some worldview shift, some underlying thing that all of a sudden resolves a bunch of issues, and you feel relief. So I had felt the same relief when I was saved. I felt the same relief when I was unsaved. So at this point, throw in COVID-19 and everything just gets weird at that point. We've got our family life, but this was February that I came out.
Right.
And I had only just started thinking, okay, now I'm kind of free to pursue community elsewhere. Attended a Sunday assembly in March. And my stated goal by default was to continue attending church with my family. So I was, both services on Sunday. I didn't attend prayer meeting because I thought it would be redundant and maybe they could use the seat for somebody else.
Yeah.
But I did go to a Sunday assembly and I met people, and this moment at the end of the meeting, they've got their snack time afterward and everybody just scatters. It's like,
yes.
Where did everybody go?
Yeah.
I'm not used to this.
Right.
The church that I attend, people hang out with each other for hours because they love each other. They care about each other. This is their life.
Yeah.
With Sunday assembly, it didn't have that. And you had a guest on recently, and maybe it was Bart Campolo or somebody like that, talking about, if you're going to get together with people, don't get together around not going to church. Not a sustainable community core. Do things, D&D or whatever, by cycling or cycling or something.
Yeah. Dr. Pinn, the most recent episode, said something similar as well. That some of the secular communities, and I'm not dragging on Sunday assembly here at all.
Sure.
But they lack kind of a reason to exist, right? You have to have a little bit more than, yay, we all don't believe in God.
Right. Right. And I really felt welcome there, and I thought it was a neat thing. I had a hard time singing pop songs.
Okay.
In that, I've got a praise band in front of me, and we're singing Cat Stevens, and am I ready for this? Why not? Whatever. It didn't meet any need of mine. I'd rather sing hymns. I know there's a beer and hymns thing that's just like drinking and belting out Christian hymns, but so anyway, it's tough. It's tough. We're still navigating. I've got other issues just thrown into the mix. My son he's practically an adult now. And I think if he had to live on his own, he'd be ready, but he's not living on his own and doesn't want to. And so we're just navigating things. And when you are not sharing the same underpinning values with your wife, then that can make the parenting thing hard, particularly when you throw, you like Russian novels, or at least did at one point.
Yeah.
Tolstoy says at the beginning of Anna Karenina, all happy families are the same. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own unique ways.
Yes.
It's like,
there's just one way to do it right.
right. Well, you throw the teenager dynamic into it. And it's like, well, they're going to come up with creative ways to test your everything.
Absolutely. They apply pressure, and that's kind of their job. And then
That's right.
Any weakness between you as parents is going to be highlighted.
Yes. And so I'm learning a lot about just interpersonal dynamics, but I'm allowed to. I can say, well, the latest literature says X, Y, Z, and there's a lot of evidence that such and such.
Yeah.
And that's good enough.
Yes.
I don't have to go to the heart issue here. Let's just not fight, and maybe we'll be okay after that.
So I don't want to do too much advice here, but I think it's a useful exercise to find the values that you do share, both wife and kids, and to be able to point out from your kind of wider perspective that you can be a humanist and a Christian and love people, or whatever values that you as a family do find intrinsically valuable. You can point out how you share these things still. There's still a Venn diagram of overlap. And so that it doesn't have to be about what we disagree about. We can focus on the things that we do agree on. And try to just get that across, that there's still those things that exist.
Yeah, actually, we had a conversation not too long ago, and we were having a down moment, and I had mentioned, well, and it was, I think, based on what you had said in a podcast episode, because you've said that before. We share these values. We want the best for our kids, and we want, I'm in transition. I'm still basically a Christian from a lot of perspectives, at least from the day-to-day practice perspectives. I don't cuss,
Yeah.
But I don't even vowelarize. So actually, I did say darn earlier. So anyway, whatever. But I live a very compatible life with enough to fool people. I haven't come out to a lot of people, like my dad, for instance. It's not a secret anymore, but I just haven't had a reason to bring it up.
Right.
Yeah. So we have appreciated the things we do share, and we've maintained a good friendship, and we had a good friendship going into our marriage. And if I ever have to give advice about marriage, it's start with the friendship aspect.
Yeah.
Like each other first,
Yeah.
Like who each other is for who they are and what their personality's like. And if you can't list reasons why you like somebody, that's not necessarily a problem, but maybe spend some time thinking about it. And because I think that's what has prevented any, like we've both recommitted to each other. Basically, I don't want to get divorced. I don't want you to get divorced from me. And so, but it's been challenging in a lot of ways. Partly there's a notion of stereotype threat. Well, threat, just category of threat. I fear being misinterpreted because an opinion that I have is anti-Christian or something like that, or different from what the party line is. She might fear me doing something to my kids, teaching them some wrong idea or whatever. I might fear her misinterpretation of my intent.
Right.
There's a real messy, vicious cycle that you could get into that I've had to be very careful about. And that's been maybe one of the bigger challenges, because it's sort of an everyday low-grade tinnitus sort of thing. It's always there.
Yeah.
There are moments when you're not focused on it, but if you stop having other noise, to drag the analogy out further, you start noticing it might drive you crazy.
Yeah.
I have appreciated hearing your perspectives in the past on marriage. And you did say something about leaving the church after a year and a half, and I was very curious why, if you're interested in telling. You had attended church for a year and a half after deconversion.
Yeah, that's actually more about my wife than me.
Oh, yeah?
Just to set the context, I came out to my wife, and one of the first things she said to me is, "You're going to church with me still," because that was the contract, so to speak. I'm being facetious, but that was effectively the conversation. And I said, "Sure, that's fine." And again, I worked very hard to support her, and I still support her spiritual growth, for whatever definition of spiritual you want to give. Right. The church we were attending is, non-denominational, Baptist under the hood, but one of the good churches, right? It's it's fairly graceful, not super super fundamentalist, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They went through a leadership transition where a beloved senior pastor is in the process of retiring, and they went through the search process and brought on a new guy who is gung-ho evangelical. We're going to, take stats and, monitor.
Oh, wow.
Just, the apply the business metrics to church perspective. And my wife was immediately like, I'm out.
Okay.
And she took a while to really be honest with me about that. And for what you're describing, right? We're kind of circling each other, trying not to offend one another. It took me a while to express to her that I'm safe, that she can trust me. She can tell me even negative opinions. And, she can say, hey, I don't like this new pastor. And it's okay. So long story short, we stopped attending there, and we just really haven't found any place else. And then COVID hit, and it just, it's kind of a screeching halt. So for any believers who are listening, my wife's favorite person out there is a guy named Tim Mackey, who does the Bible Project. So if you're a Christian, that's some real solid food there for you. And that's kind of her church at this point in time.
Oh, it's good stuff. Yeah. I listened to one on Mark.
Yes. Yeah. No, he's deep. He's a great, he would have been one of my favorite teachers, as a Christian back in the days.
Yeah.
Are there any last thoughts that you need to share?
Just, I'd like to reiterate that you're not alone, that there are other people who have gone through this more than ever in terms of who's being public about it. Listen to other people's stories, and give yourself time. And the worst parts don't last very long. The people around you who could be harmed by this, generally speaking, will be back on their feet not too long after that, and you can go on living, which has been the case for us.
I can confirm.
Yeah, and I am so thankful for the people in my life.
That's awesome. Jimmy, I appreciate the level of honesty that you've shared in your story here. That's the thing I want to point out to, if you're a believer and you're listening, the honesty that someone tells their deconversion story can be used against them. And I want you to just hear it for what it is, that Jimmy's telling his heart from his perspective, the experience. And I, for one, think it was an amazing story. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Final thoughts on the episode. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jimmy as much as I did. As I said in the intro, he's an incredibly careful person. You can tell how much thought he put into each decision in his life, including and up to the deconversion process. He was so careful with the telling of his deconversion story to his family members, to those that he loves, to make sure that he didn't damage relationships. And that can be one of the most challenging aspects of the deconversion process, is right when you are going through a tremendous upheaval, you also have to be honest with the people around you, and also not be hostile, not be so angry that you burn the bridges behind you. I think Jimmy has done an incredible job of that, and I think he is a representative of the way to go about that process. I've asked Jimmy to give me a list of the books that he mentions in the podcast. He mentions a number of influences from fiction and nonfiction that helped him along the way, including some of the Stoics. I'll add that list to the show notes. I want to thank Jimmy for being on the podcast, for telling his story, and for the honesty and forthrightness with which he tells it. I'm going to hint about a future episode here. I have a conversation with apologist Randall Rouser that's coming up. That should be here in the next couple of weeks. And in it, we talk about the idea of the apologist, and he argues that apologists are not just Christian apologists, but activists or proponents for things. So I have really taken on the mantle of apologists of doubt and apologists of deconverts or deconversion. And this is what I want to get across, is that if you are in the midst of doubt, if you are beginning to question your faith, it's not incumbent upon you to have a fully fleshed out philosophy of metaphysics to go through that process. And I think it's important to recognize that Not everyone will. I certainly didn't. I lost my faith before I understood humanism. I lost my faith before I had a complete idea of naturalism. I lost my faith before I understood how I could ground morality and ethics. I think sometimes the apologists arguing against deconversion or criticizing deconverts question an analytic philosophical perspective that isn't fully justified, and yet that just isn't what human beings do. Those truths are out there. The fun part of post-deconversion is the exploration, is the learning, going out and finding the information that has been off limits up to this point. Science, ethics, the Stoics, philosophy, what have you, whatever you find fascinating, interesting, and meaningful, that's meaningful for you, and that's powerful. The other point I want to bring up is I mentioned to Jimmy in the podcast that it sounded like that he was trying to justify his move towards Calvinism. In my document, Deconversion How To, I talk about the special feeling of shame or guilt about our former gullibility. And I just want to defend us deconverts out there that, again, for those of us who took Christianity seriously, it really is one of two or three paths that you take, either down the road of very charismatic, very Pentecostal, very emotional and demonstrative faith, either very moralistic, very legalistic, more fundamentalist, or Calvinism. These are the logical conclusions if you take faith seriously. And so if you are in one of those categories, you've gone through the deconversion process and you're feeling guilty about that, don't, right? You took it seriously, and that's why you got to where you were at. It is an indication of your desire for the truth that you are no longer there. It's okay to doubt. It is okay to question. In fact, it is an indication of your desire for truth. Trust yourself to ask the questions. Trust yourself to go find answers. Trust yourself when there are no answers. So that is the secular grace thought of the day. Until next time, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me in being graceful human beings. Time for some footnotes. The song is a track called Waves by Micaiah Beats. Please check out her music. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the podcast, here are the ways you can go about that. First, help promote it. The podcast's audience grows by word of mouth. If you found it useful or just entertaining, please pass it on to your friends and family. Post about it on social media so that others can find it. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This will help raise the visibility of our show. Join me on the podcast. Tell your story. Have you gone through a faith transition? You want to tell that to the world? Let me know and let's have you on. Do you know someone who needs to tell their story? Let them know. Do you have criticisms about atheism or humanism, but you're willing to have an honesty contest with me? Come on the show. If you have a book or a blog that you want to promote, I'd like to hear from you. Also, you can contribute technical support. If you are good at graphic design, sound engineering, or marketing, please let me know and I'll let you know how you can participate. And finally, financial support. There will be a link on the show notes to allow contributions which would help defray the cost of producing the show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, or you can send email to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. You can tweet at me at gracefulatheist, or you can just check out my website at gracefulatheist.wordpress.com. Get in touch and let me know if you appreciate the podcast. Well, this has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Grab somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.